For our Council Planning and Parks Committee meeting for Tuesday, August 17th. We will start off with a roll call, please. Mr. Cruz.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
And Chair Bartoni.
Here. Thank you, Gary, and thank you to the rest of the staff for joining us this evening. First on the agenda is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting? Made by Committee Member Flasher. I need a second. Seconded by Councilmember Nyan. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you, everyone. That brings us to public input. I do see that we have some attendees here this evening. If Travis, do you know, does anybody have their hand raised? Can you see, or does anybody out there want to speak? We do have a hand up in the air now. Mrs. Fisher. So Travis, can you move her over, please?
Yes. It's on our way.
Okay, Mrs. Fisher, I think we are ready for you.
Thank you. Hello again, everybody. I'm Nancy Fisher. My husband Dan and I live at 2066 Wild Horse Creek Road. My comments this evening, of course, are in relation to the sound testing at the fish farm. As I mentioned in my email sent this past Sunday, you can find the now almost 9-year history of the situation in the meeting minutes and meeting recordings available online. So I hope if some of you weren't familiar with this situation, you took the time to take a look at those, so you are by now. I won't bore you with all of that history. It would take forever. Let me preface my comments by letting you all know that no one is more anxious to see the situation finally resolved than Dan and I. When you've had to listen to a nonstop high-pitched squeal every time you walk out of your house for almost 9 years, believe me, you really do want it resolved. The last few months since the time frame for the testing was discussed and the subsequent testing done have been an unbelievable blessing, with no motor noise noticeable on our property. For that, we are extremely grateful. I do feel I have to call out that with the previous testing by Dr. Thunder in April of 2020, we also had a brief period of quiet, only to have the noise start again after the testing was complete. Having said all that, throughout these latest meetings with the Parks and Planning Group, there's been a great deal of discussion about this last round of testing that eventually took place this past June of 2021. Regarding that testing, we asked for only 2 things. First, we requested confirmation by Mr. Vunich and our Dr. Thunder that all 6 of the motors had been replaced with the new models. After they were allowed on site, they were able to confirm that the new models were in place. From my understanding, that was based on a completely different look to the new models that they were able to visually confirm. And for that, we really thank you. Second, we requested that all 6 motors be running at full capacity for the testing. Unfortunately, that request did not take place. The city was told that 3 of the recently installed new motors were already not operational due to being clogged with algae. You can imagine our concern and disappointment at this turn of events. While I understand that in theory, the test can estimate the noise level as if all 6 motors are running, even the report calls out in the last paragraphs, provided the equipment is well maintained, and that if the motors were to reach even 44 decibels, while it would meet the new proposed city limit, it would still be 9 decibels higher than the background ambient noise that would be substantially noticeable and twice as loud as the ambient. If the new equipment was installed in the last year has not been maintained for that short of a period, what hope do we have of it being maintained going forward? And if 3 of the new motors have failed already, what guarantee do we have that instead of correcting that issue, the old motors, or perhaps even a completely different model, might replace those that are not working? In addition, if Dr. Thunder is on this call, or his son, if time permits, I'd like them to address the noise that is still noticeable from the fish farm property line that abuts Wild Horse. Again, right now, thankfully, this noise cannot be heard on our property. However, the distance from the motors to the roadway is at least equivalent, if not further than the distance to our property, albeit in a different direction. As I walk past this area often, every other day almost, I'm interested in why the still high-pitched noise, if it tested as lower than the ambient level, is still so noticeable from the street. And when, once all the motors that face in all directions are back up and running, what guarantee can there be we won't be back at square one with the noise bleeding onto our property again? I'm guessing most of you have heard the phrase often used in business, lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. So tonight, please remember that a lack of planning and cooperation on the fish farm owner's part to have all 6 motors up and running correctly for the test, by the way, when given a few months' notice, I might add, does not constitute an emergency on your part to vote and push this forward tonight. To be clear, we fully support the reduction in the nighttime city limit to 45 decibels, or frankly, even lower, for the benefit of all Wildwood residents. And ultimately, believe it or not, we support the permitted uses being restored to the property owner. However, we ask that those permitted uses not be restored until all 6 motors are running at full capacity for another test, in hopes of providing full, complete, and meaningful results. Thank you all again for your hard work on this issue and for trying your best to keep Wildwood the peaceful, serene community it's intended to be. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Appreciate it. Is anybody else, any of the other attendees? I see we have Dr. Thunder. I think he's going to wait until we talk about this issue, but does anybody else want to speak as part of the public participation? Okay, then we will move forward with the agenda. We have, by my count, we have 7 action items, 3 planning matters. We have 4 park matters, and we do have an executive session today as well. So we will start with the aquaculture operation, and I will turn it over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight a brief memorandum with 2 reports attached to it. The 2 reports reflect the efforts of Dr. Thunder and Mr. Thunder in testing the aquaculture operation on 2 separate occasions. The department believed it was appropriate to provide you the March 2020 report because at that time, only one of the motors had been altered or changed, and the others were the older type. Dr. Thunder had theorized, and through his experience, anticipated that with that one motor, the new motor operational, there would be this projected sound at the property line. The new report actually verifies and adds the credibility to that assumption that was made in 2020. The department notes in the memorandum that Dr. Thunder and his son, Steve Thunder, have prepared the report, and both are in attendance tonight. They will provide the summary of the report and address concerns that have been raised relative to the testing protocol. I took the liberty to provide the Thunders the information that has been circulating between committee members as well as the public, those that live in the vicinity of the aquaculture operation itself. And so with your permission, Chair, I'd like to turn it over to our consultants so they can go through the report and explain the process they followed and the determinations they made. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and absolutely, we will turn it over to Dr. Thunder and Mr. Thunder now.
Thanks,
ahead,
Joe. You know, I'll have Steve go through it since Steve was the engineer that was down on the site and is more familiar with I am with the nuances and so forth of the study. I can say it was a pretty comprehensive study. It wasn't just a matter of going up at 10 p.m. at night, making a measurement. If you see in that report, that was a long-term recording from 7 p.m. at night to 8:42 in the morning. And the idea there was to capture the sound at all hours of the night. If you take a look, for example, in that figure 4, the noise levels are still relatively high at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And when Steve did his analysis, he focused his analysis on the very lowest level during the night, which was 3:45 to 4:45 p.m. That gave us the best opportunity to assess the aerator noise. Why? Because the aerator noise is constant and it's always on. So I'll let Steve go ahead and explain a little bit more and summarize his approach.
Sure. So for us, we used a pretty typical approach, which was doing a recording and then post-analyzing that recording at a later time. And that's been a very good method for us because it allows us to examine anything that's happening during that recording. So for example, I was able to isolate that time period when the noise level is the lowest and confirm, for example, the insect noise was quite loud during that period of time, and I could audibly hear that. And so I could was able to confirm audibly what it is, and able to confirm what frequencies it was. So that's been a very good approach for us. It's a calibrate approach. We put record a calibrated tone with our equipment and are able to then analyze everything. The reason we have the 2 locations is one of the important parts of any acoustical analysis is understanding what the background noise is. And in this type of scenario, we're not able to shut down the aerators for a lengthy period of time. And at the time we didn't know the lowest period was going to be between, around 1 a.m. And so we didn't even know what time period we would have to shut them off for. So that wasn't really practical to shut the aerators off. So what we do is the next best thing, which was to move down the road to a spot that's got a similar soundscape. It's going to have the same type of distant traffic, different, similar sounds in the environment to give us the ambient noise that way. And we're able to compare it to that. Let's see. So what we did is we took, and I think you guys can see in figure 2, we were able to record that noise over a long period of time, analyze what it did, look at the time at around 1 a.m. was the lowest. Now, had the aerators been the main noise source in this area, that line would have been totally flat. If we were measuring just the aerators, we would have just seen a almost completely flat line, except for occasional heightened levels at different times. And so we know with pretty good certainty that what we're measuring there is only the aerators at a minimum during that 1 a.m. period. And then figure 3, we did a 1/3 octave band analysis. So what that is we're taking a look at the frequency spectrum. What are the different parts of this sound? What's the high frequency content versus the low frequency content? And that's where we were able to discover that the main driver for the noise that we were measuring at that time was insect noise. And based on a lot of experience and knowing that insect noise is in that range, then audibly confirming that, we were able to exclude some of that noise so we could project what would the actual noise from the aerators be. And that's what that dashed line represents. It's saying, hey, if we were to take out this insect noise, what would the noise from these aerators be? And so what we measured was 33 dBA. So with taking out the insect noise, we're able to measure 33 dBA, and that was at the property line. And then if you see the red line in figure 3, that's marked 36 dBA, that's an acoustical adjustment. That's because at the time of this recording, there was only 3 aerators run. Mr. Lisk informed us that the aerators he wasn't running currently because they didn't have any fish in those pens, which is logical. Why would you run them if there's no fish in the pens? And I think he said they'd also become clogged from sitting and not running for a while. So it wasn't something he could just fire right up. So at the time, given the situation, we only had 3 aerators running. And I will say this is kind of common for field work. This is what we deal with all the time. Tom can even tell you more about that, but this is field work. This is not lab work. So we always have to make some type of adjustments as we go. And that's why we do this. This is what we do. So the adjustment from 3 aerators to 6 aerators is really quite easy. I could tell you right off the bat, it's a 3 dB increase. That's an acoustic property that every time you double the number of sources, it raises the level by 3 dB. So it's actually really easy math. So double the sources, raise it by 3 dB. So I knew even before doing any calculations, it was going to come out to 36 dBA. So let's see.
And how does that agree, Steve? That agrees very well with our 2020 report. Where based on the measurement of one prototype aerator on the dock, we extrapolated that measurement out to the property line and then added in 5 more and came up with 37 dB. In acoustics, that's virtually identical. So the 2 studies are very much in agreement with each other.
Yeah. So to kind of go into a little more depth there, our study, the report was March 23rd, 2020. So that was the first report we did. We took all our analysis there. We did a measurement was very close to just one of the aerators, one of the new aerators. And based on that close measurement, we were able to mathematically propagate that sound out and predict what it would have been at the property line when 6 were running. And that's how we came up with the 37, which, like Tom said, was only 1 dB different than our analysis here. So it's virtually identical acoustically. Figure 4 was really all about, okay, what is the normal ambient noise in this area then as well? And how do we establish this ambient noise? We talked about how the area near the fishery wasn't really very good for establishing what that ambient noise is because the aerators are running all the time. We have to get analysis that doesn't have that in. So we chose a location by the water tower, a lot because of the access. There is a road nearby, but that was actually fairly easy to exclude the cars because there weren't that often, especially in the middle of the night. So you could see in figure 4, we looked at the time period from 3:45 a.m. to 4:45 a.m., which was the lowest period there. And it was the measurement we had was the 35 dBA L50. Now, L50 is a statistical analysis. It's saying what was the level when the sound was above 50% of the time and below 50% of the time. What's that level in the middle? And you can see that's that darker purple line. And it's very steady. Each one of those light blue lines, the little spikes, really represents probably a car passing by. Most of those, we don't listen to every single one. We pick out different ones to listen to and verify, but they're all virtually cars that are passing by. And you can see it didn't really have any effect on the L50, which is a good measurement of that ambient background noise. And that's how we're able to verify that. And so that came out as 35 dBA. So only a 1 dB difference than what we projected the aerator noise to be with all 6 of the aerators running. And acoustically, impact-wise, that's just not. It's virtually identical. It's very, very small. There's very limited impact, really no impact from that kind of level difference. Tom, do you want to add some more? Anything else that you want to add?
No, I think that's a good job, Steve, that as Steve had mentioned, you can't walk up and make a measurement and assume that all that sound is coming from the aerators. There has to be some consideration for background sound. In fact, here in the state of Illinois, we're required to subtract out the background sound because the only thing that the noise maker is responsible for is their sound, not anybody else's sound. And so in order to do that, you have to turn off that equipment and make a measurement according to the state over a 10-minute period without that source on to establish the background noise. And as Steve said, you can't do that in this situation. So that's why he moved far enough away from the fishery so that the fishery noise was not an element, but yet still stay in the same area. So what we captured was the same soundscape that would be up and down that road. And as Steve mentioned, we use the statistical approach, determining what that median level is. That the purpose of that is to filter out all the car noise. So we're just getting what's called the baseline or the quiescent level without the car noise factored in there. So our conclusions is that the fishery noise based on our measurement is commensurate with the background sound level, not any higher with the new equipment installed. In answer to Nancy's question, we don't know what the other three motors are doing. We verified that they weren't operating. And I think, Steve, wasn't you guys verified they were the same make and model at least?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was very obvious. They looked exactly like, they looked all brand new. They were the same. We didn't get down and weren't able to verify the exact serial numbers or anything like that, but everything said to us that they were the all new models. Nothing would tell us otherwise. So that's what we were able to see.
So there's no reason to believe that if those units were run, that it would exceed the analysis that we've done here. Of course, the only way to verify that maybe is to make actual sound measurements on the dock. So you're away from all the background noise and you turn on each individual aerator and you stand at the same distance and verify that the decibel level is indeed the same for all 6 of them. That would be a way to verify without going back and redoing this entire study.
I think the only thing we didn't cover is that the sound level in comparison to the current city nighttime limit of 50 dB is the 36 dB that we came up with is well below that. It's still even well below 45 dB limit if it was changed to that. So in either scenario, it's well below the city noise limit. To give you guys an idea of how sound works and how the audible differences are perceived, the 3 dB change is a pretty small change. It's a noticeable change, but it's small. You step up to about 5 or 6 dB difference, and it's very obvious change, much more obvious change. And by the time you get to a 10 dB difference, 10 dB is considered twice as loud or half as loud, depending on which way you're going. And that's really how sound works. It's all about what's the differences in the levels. So at 9 dB is a very significant difference between the limit and what we measured. So, Tom, unless you have anything else to add, do we want to open up questions or?
No, I think the biggest thing that we noticed is that as we made our measurements, there was no noticeable tonal quality to the sound.
Yes.
And that would have come up on our frequency analysis if there was. If you remember that your ordinance has a penalty for tonal corrections, the state of Illinois does too. A 5 decibel penalty is applied. And we noted last year that that was the primary annoyance from these aerators, not so much the overall level, but the tonal quality of it. And quality has a lot to do. We call that an adverse acoustical character. And so with the experimental unit that we measured last year, our frequency analysis showed that that tonal quality was gone. So not only was the overall noise level a little bit lower, but more importantly, the tonal aspect of it was gone. And we verified that on testing these 3 units. So again, as long as the other 3 units are the same make and model, there is no reason to believe that the results would be any different.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your report and your expertise. Joe, do you want to speak first, or do you have any comments on that, or you wanted me to just see if any of the other committee members want to ask questions first?
I think it's time for the committee to basically discuss the matter with the Thunders, but thank you for asking.
Okay, does anybody on the committee have any questions? Okay, go ahead. We got Teresa and Rob, I got you next.
I just want to, I just don't like to base our solution, our conclusion on theoretical data that's based on theoretical data, or that compares to theoretical data. The theoretical data we got from the 2020 showed one thing, and then we said, oh, well, that matches with what our theoretical data on the 2021 came up with, and it should, because we're basing it on something that would be working properly all the time. I've done testing too, but the testing of the motors, of the aerators, is one thing. And the testing of the sound surrounding, the noise level surrounding the fish pond is a whole different thing, in my opinion. That we are testing whether or not, with working six of the motors, 6 aerators working and running, functioning, if a sound is produced, whether it's coming from the motor or the motors together are causing something. If the motors were manufactured properly, I lived in China 14 years. I know how things are manufactured there. If they were damaged in shipping, if there was something wrong that caused them to clog, and the maintenance after, if they, if something happened and the RPMs changed or anything like that, that would have caused some other noise. We just don't have something yet to verify that our theoretical data is correct. And I know that we can make assumptions on that, but I'm not convinced that we have completely put this to bed for our residents. And they had asked for this test to be done, and I think we agreed that we would do it the way they had asked for it to be done. And then we've only tested 3 of the 6, or the area with 3 of the 6 running. So that was one of my comments. Another one is on figure 3, I don't have a red line, just so you know. You talked about the red line, but I don't have one on figure 3. And another comment is that in the report, the background noise that you determined was between 33 and 35 decibels. And if with every 10 decibel, that perceived loudness is doubled, as well as our sound pressure level is increased, I would suggest that our original thought to change it to 40 decibels would be a little bit more appropriate than 45, because if we are saying our ambient noise level is 35 and we bounce it up to 10 decibels more, that's doubling the perceived loudness, if I'm not mistaken. So I would err more on the 40 decibels as our limit. And that would be my reasoning behind that. I had points on the L50, but I won't go into that. And on the 2020 report, the Hertz, the old motor that was tested, it had a 3450 RPM with a 2500 Hertz. What is the RPM on the one that we have now, the new one? Just out of curiosity, if you know that. And how many blades are on the rotor?
I don't know the answer to that offhand. There was no prominent tone for us to measure in this case. There wasn't anything, no prominent tone audible. There was no prominent tone to measure. And that was also true in the case of the 2020 report. The blue line there was the new blower. And as you can see, there was no prominent tone. So it didn't really come into play as much. In this case, when we were looking at determining that frequency, we wanted to make sure that the frequency we measured lined up what mathematically would be the prominent tone out of a blower. And you can calculate that based on the number of blades and the RPM. You can calculate out the approximate tone. And in that case, we had alignment between those two, where the calculated blade tone was 2,580 hertz, and sure enough, the 2,500 hertz band was also showing us. So that was kind of a confirmation for us, was the reason of that portion of the analysis. When we no longer had that prominent tone, we didn't do that part of the analysis.
I was asking that just because we had taken out the 4,000 to 5,000. You'd taken that out for the insect, the noise of the insects. I think it was 4,000 to 5,000.
Yes.
I remember it for, yeah. So I just didn't know whether or not that was possible. And I was going to do that calculation to see if it was possible for whatever RPMs and number of rotor blades you had, and to see if there was a possibility of another noise that would be produced, since the neighbors have heard at the edge of the road some other noises. That was my...
Well, based on the data we had from the last time, we could see clearly that that's the blue line on, let's see, figure 3 in the 2020 report. That blue line doesn't show any prominent tone. Furthermore, if you look in that 4,000 to 5,000 hertz range, that's not the loudest level in there. So that it would be what, around maybe 1,600 hertz, maybe 2,000. So it wasn't part of our analysis in this one. We didn't feel that was necessary.
I suppose I would want to know if there's been any changes in those motors and suppliers for their parts and all before I would make that determination. But I do things more on a black belt, Six Sigma kind of detail.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Rob, I got you, and Deborah, I got you next.
Yeah, my thing's real simple. I'm with everything that Teresa said, but I'm approaching this as an engineer. I'm approaching this as just a simple measurement problem, and so it wasn't clear to me in the documentation that there 3 of the 6 motors were running full bore. Their highest capacity, generating the most noise they're likely to make as long as they're well maintained in the water, agitating water, complete assemblies, not just some simulation. Is that the way it happened?
I can just attest that they are running as normal. That's what we were informed, that they had 3 motors running as normal. So
some of the consternation, the concern of the folks is that there's a lot of bad blood, and they don't want to take anybody's word for much of anything, to be honest. I don't think, and you're making the probably perfectly reasonable assumption based on some goodwill that these motors, the entire pump motor assembly times 3 is making 33 dBA of noise after you're factoring, and you're claiming to us, which is theoretically accurate, that the noise will increase by 3 dB if you double the number of motors, and they're roughly in the same rough area on a single dock, back at your microphones, where your microphones are. But it's hard to get comfortable with that unless we know for sure that these were in sort of peak operation, I would say, times 3, generating 33 dBA of noise. And it sounds as though you are at least trusting in some degree what you were told, and I think that's where people are concerned. Is there an easy way for us to address that? I'm comfortable with the measurement and the fact that 6 motors will increase the noise by 3 dBA. That all makes sense. I sort of verified it via other means. but we still have that problem, which is what Teresa was alluding to. How would you propose to fix that?
Well, I mean, there's a few approaches. I mean, the one approach I think Tom already brought up would be to measure each pump individually so we know that they're all outputting the same. In regards to what they're set at, I don't know on that. All I was informed of is that they're running normally. And so that's what we base it on, is that they're running normally.
Yeah.
So that's levels at all. Huh?
Yeah, that's an assumption. As I said, a perfectly reasonable assumption. I'm not slamming your work at all. But my lawnmower, if I run it moderately, it makes one class of noise. If I crank it up all the way, the throttle, it's making a lot more noise. And when I engage the blades, it's making still more noise, etc. And that's the concern. And so maybe if it's easy and if it's the simplest way to get to drive the last nail in the coffin, I would strongly suggest that we try that measurement, max output in the water, running as hard as it can run, and then you guys can extrapolate the sound pressure level for 6, and we'll probably be comfortable with that.
Joe, my question for you, was there any talk that these are variable speed type of motors? To our
I have no clue on that. We're flying blind here. I don't know that Teresa has that information. She and I looked into it a little bit. I certainly don't know. I haven't done all my homework as an engineer. I kind of tend to dot every I and cross every T, but I've been busy on other things, and so I kind of fell down on this one, and it's quite important, but I'm relying on Teresa's expertise to really stay on top of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, to our understanding, these are either on or off. They're driven electrically. They're not gas powered, so you don't throttle them up or throttle them down. So you either turn them on or off. And that's been our understanding. Maybe Joe has a different understanding on that. So we're pretty confident in that measurement. And to Teresa's comment, she's probably referring to manufacturing tolerances, that yes, there can be some small changes from one unit to the next, but that's why we had recommended, if you want that verification without knowing how many blades or models or anything like that, it's a pretty simple task to go right on the dock and make a measurement directly of each individual motor, like we had done last year, at a specific distance. And that falls in line with a lot of specifications. When we do mechanical specifications for certain jobs, we specify this motor shall not exceed 70 dB at a distance of 20 feet, period. And that's a specification. So when we go to confirm that, we go out in the field and we turn motors on and off, and we make that measurement at that distance to verify whether that motor fails or passes that particular test. So that would be something to do, as I mentioned before, without recreating the entire noise study that we have here.
Sure. And I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting a real simple, quick and dirty verification thing. But I will say that any pump, it takes a lot more mechanism and a lot more complexity to make a variable speed, pump motor. But what you can do is dial the output. You can tune the aeration, have some of it blowing on the surface of the water, which would generate different kinds of sound. You can have you can throttle it down so that some of the air is escaping and only some of it is going underwater, which would change the sound characteristics. So there are ways to make it either noisier or quieter in normal operation of just people's fish tank. And I don't see that this is a whole lot different. It's just bigger. And so that there are some variables that haven't completely been taken into account. And that's the complaint. But my only other comment, we can figure out as a group how to address this. My only other comment is that the ambient noise here in my woods is different in June than it is in August, because the bugs have really cranked up and they are quite a bit noisier now. And so as this is kind of an aside from this particular problem, but as we're deciding on ambient noise levels at night, I don't know how we take that into account, but it seems to me it ought to be understood and taken into account.
Rob, it was taken into account. If you look at Steve's figure 3, you can readily see that insect noise. We encounter that problem frequently in our measurements. And so I spotted that right away, recognized it as insect noise. Steve did an audition on the recording, said, yep, that is. And so we accounted for that by drawing that dashed line and saying, what if this was October and the insects weren't an issue, what kind of spectrum would we expect? And he drew that line connecting it, and then he recalculated the overall level to estimate what that level would be in the background if it was not measured in August during insect time. And that's why he was able to reduce the sound from what, Steve, 35 to 33?
I think it was 39 to 33.
Oh, 39. Yeah.
We were just, I made that comment, as I said, it's a sort of a issue as opposed to direct at this one. It was the 40 dB versus 45 dBA at night, you know, our ambient noise standard. I think we're talking about revising that. And I just wanted to mention that we need to take that into account. So I'm not talking about your study per se.
Okay, absolutely. And it's pretty common to see lower ambient noise levels out in rural areas. You know, we've talked about that before. And certainly when we do wind turbine noise, Illinois has a limit of 45 dB, and almost every wind turbine company around claims that they meet the Illinois noise code, 45 dB. But if you go out there and you make a measurement in the ambient in a rural area, you'll come up with 32, 33, 35 dB. As Steve said, 45 dB is twice as loud then as the ambient. And so that's got to be part of annoyance complaints, is not so much meeting an absolute level, but how does it compare with the ambient? How does it compare with people's expectations of where they're living? So absolutely, with the wind turbine type of noise, we have advocated a 40 dB limit, and a number of counties have adopted that for specific projects of wind turbines.
Okay, well, I'm done. I threw the issue on the table as I see it. I think that Teresa will probably have some more comments. So over to you, Deb.
Okay, well, thanks for helping me out there, Rob. So, Deborah, go ahead, please.
I have some of the same concerns that Teresa and Dr. Rambo both have. One that hit me really hard was, well, what is normal? And can the levels change? And I do think the residents won't be content until we have all 6 of them running at the same time and take a measurement. And then I honestly do not want to see our level go beyond 40. I would honestly be happier if it was at 35, because when you start adding in any of the additional factors, if it's 40, it could go up to 49, which is right back at 50. Close. I mean, but you'd add that as well. But I'm not comfortable with anything over 40. And I think we still have some investigation to do.
Thank you, Deborah. Any other members want to have any questions? Teresa, anything new?
I would just ask Mr. Bunich if that's possible for us to go in and what Rob was talking about, to go back out there and do this test again with the thunders and see if we can determine each of these motors what I hate to say only individually, but if that's all we could get. But because like Deb said, I would also like for the neighbors to have them all running at the same time, full speed, because sometimes things interfere with each other. So that happens with sounds too. So if there was a way to do it with all of them running and with each one at, you know, to determine which one is doing it, or if any of them are making a different noise, if they're making a noise at all. Of course, they're making a sound. I'm talking noise. But Yeah, I would agree with Rob on that, and with an addition of doing them all at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Joe?
Well, certainly I'd be glad to ask Mr. List if we could, again, return to his property, enter onto the property and conduct the testing that's just been described by Ms. Clark. Again, as you know, there's no violation that exists on the property. We've now done 4 separate noise analysis on the property, 2 by a local firm, McClure Engineering, and 2 by Dr. Thunder's firm and his son, Steve. So I can't force my way onto the property. I have to do it with the cooperation of the property owner, but I'd be more than happy to ask him for that permission.
Thank you, Joe. And that's kind of where I'm coming to also, is how many, it's almost like we're going to continue to do tests until we get a violation. You know, it's, you know, we just keep making these tests and they're, you know, we're finding out that the site is in compliance with all of our codes, and we're either going to change our code to where it's not in compliance, or we're going to continue to make tests until we get it out of compliance. So, I mean, I would ask Dr. Thunder and Mr. Thunder that, would you, like, in your expert opinion, and you're the experts here, and I mean, that's kind of what I'm going to base my decision on, is your expertise. But do you think, would you anticipate any different results if we did the tests one at a time on the docks, all 6? I mean, you kind of already told us the answer if all 6 were running.
Yeah, as I said before, we just need to have some verification so the residents are satisfied that the 3 that were not operating are indeed the same units that generate the same sound. And as I mentioned, you don't need to repeat an environmental study that we've done or the extent of it, but simply to go right onto that dock, right near those units, so it's away from background sound. You get a nice clean measurement, and you turn them on and off one at a time, and then you take a look at the results and you see what the decibel ratings are. It's not going to change. If you make a measurement at 50 feet, it's not going to change at 500 feet or 1,000 feet.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Farmer.
Yeah, real quick. Dr. Thunder, I appreciate your guys' time and your initiative to do this study and things like that. My question, I guess, is maybe a little different, as I'm not an engineer, but Joe, I mean, is there a bad actor in this process? Like, I appreciate Mr. List letting us on the property to do the study, but was sort of the understanding of that study going to be, hey, we need to get, you know, number 1, we need to get all new motors. Number 2, we need to have all the motors running, and then we can test this. And so we are only kind of getting half satisfied, or are we just sort of testing to test, as I guess as Don was kind of talking about? I mean, I think if you put, I would imagine, I've never done this before, but the second you in order to do its job, it's no longer a perfectly functional motor. So, you know, if we're a year into using a motor and 3 of these things don't work because they're not being cared for properly, I don't know that there's going to be any level of a solution that anybody will be happy with, because they're not going to be performing machinery at all times. So I might have missed it. I hopped on a few minutes late here, but like, was the original plan for this study that all of these things were supposed to run? Because I understand the math, the theoretical math makes perfect sense to me, but I also, and people feel like they're hearing things. Doesn't matter if you tell them if it's 10 dB or 20 dB, they still hear what they hear. Does that make sense?
Joe?
Mr. Farmer, I think the assumption was if that there were 6 aerators, the 6 aerators would have been tested. When Mr. Thunder and I arrived at the property, we were advised that the 3 were not operational. It wasn't because they weren't maintained, they were just not being used. And as part of that, algae had clogged the line, and then there had been an issue with 1 or 2 of them regarding the outtake, as I recall. I depended on Mr. Thunder and Dr. Thunder to tell me if the test could be valid without the 3 operational. They told me it could, and so I made the decision to proceed forward. If it's a wrong decision, I apologize. But again, I depend on the experts, and I believe in this particular instance, we have probably two of the best people in the country to assist us in this regard.
I couldn't agree more, Joe. I mean, I am of the opinion that, you know, we can only trust our experts to give us, you know, their expert opinion on things. I believe these gentlemen have done that. I think that the theoretical, you know, the idea that it is through theoretical math, I'm actually okay with it because that's how I deal with most things throughout my day. I just wonder if the real problem that we're dealing with is, as we were mentioning, I think before, like a bad blood situation where we're just not trusting what people are saying. So if we initially intended to have 6 of these motors running, and for whatever reason, 3 of them were not, I don't know that any answer that we come up with is going to satisfy whomever may have an issue with it. Because the question could be asked, well, what, you know, it is mighty convenient that these 3 things aren't working, I suppose. So, I mean, what I don't want to have is some of these situations that we've been in, and, you know, perhaps this is dragging along that way where we just have study after study after study trying to get an answer to not the right question, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, if this is a feelings conversation about we need to feel like we're being listened to and that we're getting all the information we can get, and then we're going to be satisfied by that number, great. But I mean, I'm not well-versed enough in this to understand if that's going to be the case.
Thank you, Joe. Rob, I see you got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, real quickly, I wasn't suggesting a restudy. This is perfectly fine work. I think it's good work. There are operating parameters for these pumps quite likely that may not have been taken into account. The adjustments that I mentioned, you know, how much is air and how much is bubbles and those kinds of things. And I do think that there's some, as Joe suggested, some bad blood and some mistrust. And I think there's probably a simple way to get rid of that by verifying, going over there one more time, verifying that these motors are operating. You know, we tested them in sort of optimal conditions. They're brand new. They're never going to be any quieter. And we have built in a fudge factor in our nighttime standard of the 40 or maybe 45 dBA. But I would like to see us look at the equipment itself, verify that it's either on or off, no difference in the bubbles, no difference in the air, no hissing, no vibration, no nothing. And yeah, they're new, but they're probably not going to get much noisier, and just leave it at that. It seems quite simple and straightforward in my mind, and probably relatively inexpensive. And I think it would be concrete data that would satisfy most reasonable folks. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Rob. Sorry, folks. Thank you, Rob. Deborah, did you have your hand up?
I think Teresa had hers up before I had mine up.
Well, and I know we're a little bit more lax on the committees than we are at council, but Teresa's already spoken twice also. I really don't want to get into setting a precedent of more than that. So Deborah, go ahead, please.
Okay, I just wanted to speak to the comment that we may be lowering our code to get a certain perspective from this particular situation, and I don't think that's the case. I think our code level is a total separate issue, and so I don't think we're adjusting our codes to meet this situation. I think we just need to adjust our code, and I think that's 2 different issues. But again, I think we need to have all 6 of the aerators running and get a reading on that, because I think that's what's going to please our residents.
Thank you, Deborah. Does anybody else? Tracy, go ahead, please.
I just have a quick question. How do we ensure then, if they go back to test them, that they will will all be functioning and running. I hate to have them go out there again and run into the same situation all over again. I don't know what we can do to, we can't, I guess, make him say they're all running. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Joe.
To date, I have found Mr. List to be cooperative when I've asked him for certain access and information. What I would do if this is the approach we want to proceed, I would contact Mr. Lisk at least 48 hours, if not longer, in advance to make sure that the equipment is running, is functional at its intended speeds, and at least have that assurance before Steve Thunder, Dr. Thunder, or both come to town. So that's the best I can offer, is that at least in advance of their visit, we know that it's all functional and ready to go.
Thank you, Joe. Does any other committee member have a question? Okay, Teresa, promise me I am not making a mistake and setting a precedent here. Please be very quick with anything new.
Well, since other people spoke more than twice, I will go ahead and make a motion that we proceed with looking into this further with the going ahead with the testing of each motor as Rob had laid out.
Okay, we have a second. Deborah, are you seconding that? You are? Okay. So we do have a motion on the floor to, I guess, move forward with testing all 6 motors at the same time, if I'm like interpreting that correctly, Teresa?
That's correct. To test each of the motors separately, one at a time, as even Dr. Thunder was talking about, that would probably put our residents at ease. And yeah, there's issues there, but these residents have been so patient, and they are the nicest people, both both of the residents that live over there. And they
Thank you, Teresa.
have tried. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead and finish, please.
They have, it's been like 9 years that they've been trying to do this, and many of us have been over there and heard that noise also. So it's not something that they're just imagining.
No, nobody's thinking that they are imagining it. And kind of like what Mrs. Fisher said earlier, she's happy that the noise previously is gone and the motors that are installed now. Steve, did you have something you wanted to say, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Just a quick question for Mr. Vunich. Joe, do you have money in your budget for another round of testing on the purchase order?
It's a very good question, sir. And I guess you and I will have to put our heads together tomorrow and figure that out.
Because this is not going to be done for free, as far as I know. Is that right, Mr.? Is that correct, Tom Thunder? Are you doing this for us?
Yes, and I'm suggesting, because I think there might be some confusion here about all 6 of them running. That's not what I was suggesting, and I'm not suggesting a study of the scope and nature that we just completed, because that is extensive. Along Rob's lines, our task, our scope, is to go onto the dock, make individual measurements of each motor, each aerator, to find out what the decibel emissions are of each unit, and to assure that they're all the same. Is that correct, Rob?
I was looking at this as an addendum to your already comprehensive report to demonstrate just that. Hey, these motors, as long as they don't completely fail and have something grinding against something else, are going to generate roughly this amount of noise, calculated it out, and it seems like a very straightforward, easy, and very low cost way to put the final nail in this. That was my thinking.
And I would
Okay,
add
thank
to
you.
that, along Rob's line, that we document a lot of stuff when we're out in the field. So Rob, we could actually take pictures of
Sure.
each aerator, so that you have, or a short video, so you have a sense as to the adjustments that you talked about, in terms of ratio of aeration and so forth.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. Or just get the, the manuals for those things or whatever, just so we have them on file. I'm not suggesting that we revisit this occasionally, just that we understand if there are, adjustments that can be made. I'm trying to do this cheap and easy.
Well, let's
Okay.
make sure, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my conversation kind of got hijacked there a little bit. Joe, I want to make sure that you know, eyes wide open, regardless of whether this is easy or not easy, what the cost is for this additional round of testing. We need to understand that if this is $500 or if it's $5,000, that is important to know with our budget as tight as it is. That's a piece of information that is critical, and I'd like to find that out, please.
That's a good point. Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, that there's the question about the other 3 aerators. I guess, to Rob's point regarding potential different settings that could be there for higher or lower sound output, depending on the amount of the motor running, and then depending on the aeration. I mean, isn't that information that we could gather just by talking to the owner, or like you said, pulling up manuals of the actual models of those units to figure out? I mean, because the way I see it is that if they're all functioning and they're all set up the same way, and we've already measured 3 of them, and we're able to extrapolate and calculate what that noise is going to be for the other 3 and all 6 together, if we can ascertain that there are no separate settings, and that when it's, to Mr. Thunder's point, when they're plugged in, they're running at the same speed. I don't understand why we would need to go back out there and physically measure the sound off of the other 3. That to me sounds like a waste of money. And now if there's ability to have different settings on these motors, and you could have them higher or lower, or we can figure out that they're set up differently in the water, where some are deeper, some are not, and that kind of thing, then that might be something to consider. But I would almost think somebody from the city could go out there and look at them physically, if the property owner is cooperative, as Joe had mentioned, and just look and see that they're all set up the same way. And then if we can verify from the product information manual that they only have one setting, and when they're plugged in, they operate at the exact same setting, I don't see why we would have to physically go out there and measure the other 3 individually. That to me just seems a little redundant.
That makes sense.
Mike, hold on. I mean, like I said, I'm trying to keep these as casual as possible, but please let me take control here. Councilmember Farmer.
Thanks. Can I amend the motion?
Sure.
Can we amend it to say that I really like Mike's idea there, but I was just going to say, kind of along the lines of Steve, I would like to understand how much any part of an additional study is going to cost before we agree to do it. If it's a couple $100, whatever, if it's several $1,000s, that's a much bigger ticket item, and we've got some important things that we're dealing with. So I think maybe amending it to, have a conversation. If Joe wants to have a conversation with Dr. Thunder or whatever on, what does an amended study, as limited in scope as we're talking about, actually cost us before we go down this road of actually doing it.
Okay, so before I ask for a second on that, Joe, would it be okay if part of that, I guess, homework for Joe would be maybe staff could get the answer to some of those questions without getting, another study done? Would you be okay if that was part of the amendment?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think, I understand, staff time isn't money out of the budget technically, I guess, but I mean, it's still a resource that we're expending on something. So I just kind of want to know what that takes. I mean, if it's a trip out to the location one time, that's not a big deal. But if we got to keep going back, it's problematic.
Joe, I don't mean to be volunteering your time, but is understanding of the crux of of the question and the request. Is this something you think that you and staff could get answers for the committee?
Well, certainly we can verify the equipment model. We can take photographs of the installations, both that on the dock and as it enters into the water. We can do, I think, a lot of those requests that have been made by the committee. But certainly I would not feel comfortable taking individual measurements. It's just not something that I think would, let's say, stand in the court of law, so to speak. And I don't mean that from a litigious point of view, just that it's not my area of expertise. But certainly I can take photographs, I can look at model numbers, we can search for the manuals, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. So Councilmember Farmer made a motion. We do need a second on that motion.
Please repeat the motion as amended.
Basically that I wanted to get a level of the price of what going out and doing this additional study would be before we jump on the ship of going and doing it. So whether that's staff time or Dr. Thunder's time or whatever, how much money are we talking about? Knowing that before we go too far down the road.
Okay, and Councilmember Flasher, are you seconding that motion? Okay, so if anybody has anything to say, we would be discussing the amendment to the motion, which would be on getting a bid on that additional work that is being requested. So that would be what anyone would have to talk about. And Rob, is that what you want to discuss?
Yes, just real quickly, I want to add something in there about, making this a minimum cost, sort of affair. I mean, we have a pretty good plan. Mr. Vunich said that he could go out there, look at the dock, take photos of the manuals, and the Thunder folks could do this remotely, just kind of look through the documentation and verify that there aren't any settings, or maybe that there are, and some of the operational stuff. And we can probably do this remotely for a very modest cost. And that's a little bit different. That's saying it a little bit differently than Mr. Farmer and Mr. Galani put, and I don't know how to summarize, but that would be my suggestion.
Point of order, please.
What is your point of order, Deborah?
First he was discussing just cost-wise amendment, and then you came back and was discussing with Joe what it was he could or could not do. So has your comments been included in this amendment, or are we going strictly with Mr. Farmer's amendment?
I guess I kind of amended it a little bit. Sorry, Don.
No, go ahead, Joe. My understanding was that we would, see how much staff could get done, Deborah, and if the part that staff could not get completed, we would get a bid on. And I would guess Joe would bring that to our next next committee meeting. And then, Joe might have gotten the answers and that we're all looking for, and we don't have to go any farther. But if we would have to go farther, he would have a bid for us from Dr. Thunder, Mr. Thunder, to move forward. Does that make sense, Deborah?
That's actually two different amendments.
I think they were just, the intention was to include them together.
Right. I mean, I don't care. We can do it however we need to do it. I feel like we're spending an awful lot of time talking about a noise study that we don't know how much it's going to cost, which was already spent a bunch of money on.
Okay, so is there any other discussion on the amendment to the motion? Okay, so let's take a roll call vote on the amendment to the motion, which is to have staff to investigate some of the questions that were asked about the motors, etc. And any questions staff was not able to answer, they would get a bid from Dr. Thunder, Mr. Thunder, to find out how much it would be to go any farther.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Cruz?
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Nian,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Abstain.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Chair Bartoni.
Yes. So that's on the amendment, which, so I'm probably going to need a little bit of help here, Steve. So that's on the amendment to the motion. And then the original motion, which was made by Councilmember Clark, which I'm going to confess, I don't remember exactly what it was. But do we then take a vote on that, correct?
Well, depending on what the motion was, the maker of that motion and the person who seconded that original motion may want to withdraw it if that has pretty much been superseded by this amended motion. And I don't recall what the original motion was either. Perhaps the maker could repeat that, or the recorder.
Gary, do you have it?
The motion I have is a motion to proceed with the testing of all 6 motors at the aquaculture facility.
Okay, so I guess that being said, Teresa, do you want to just withdraw that in the meantime until this other work gets finished, or how do you want to proceed?
It would be appropriate for me to withdraw that for now until the amendment has been looked into and come back to the meeting for discussion.
Okay,
So
and Deborah, I think you were the second of that motion. Are you okay with that as well?
Yes.
Okay, so that being said, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I just want to clarify, make sure that everyone understands that the amended motion is for Joe Vunich, Mr. Vunich, to do as he suggested, going out and looking at the motors and getting model numbers, serial numbers, that type of thing. But you all were very interested in having each individual motor tested, which cannot be done by city staff. So, I mean, so in fact, that will require getting a bid from the Thunders, because because I think you all are still on, you still want those motors tested, all 6 of them. I didn't hear that go away. So that is going to require part of the report that comes back to this committee next month. Will be including staff time, how much staff time is going to be required to do what Joe is able to do, as well as what it's going to cost to have all 6 motors individually tested. Just want to make sure that that's everyone's understanding. That's my understanding. And I think that Mr. Vunich, you speak up as well, but I think that's exactly what you all are asking for. Which then takes care of Councilmember Clark's withdrawal, because that was to have the motors tested. So that motion was withdrawn because it's covered in the second motion, or the amended motion. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that.
Correct. Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna try to simplify it a little bit because I feel like we're kind of running in circles on some of these things. But kind of what I brought up earlier is, I think what Joe Farmer said is, let's go ahead and get the bid on whatever it's going to cost to measure all 6 or the other 3, so that we can get that bid, so we know what that's going to cost if in fact we decide to go that route. But what city staff could do is literally do 2 things. Go out there and make sure they're all installed the same way. And you can take pictures of that just to show that they're all set up the same way. And then secondly, just find the model number and then just look it up and verify that there is one singular setting that they run on. So therefore, if we can answer those 2 questions, then the 3 we've already tested, there's absolutely no reason to think that the other 3 wouldn't make the same amount of noise if they all operate on one setting and they're all installed the same way. We'll know how much it would cost to noise test the other 3, but at that point, I don't see any reason why we would even need to entertain that if we were able to verify those other questions first. So I think those are the 2 things city can do, and then we can always get that price. So in case we weren't able to get the proper information the other way, we can figure out if it makes sense to do that. But I think that, to me, makes it a lot more simple.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I agree. Guys, we're over an hour on this. We've got a lot to cover. I would ask, we have a motion. We've passed that motion. I don't really see anything else to discuss at this point unless I'm missing something. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Thunder. Mr. Thunder, thank you very much for spending your time with us this evening, for your work, and for your very comprehensive report. We appreciate it very much.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. Thank you.
So moving on our agenda, the next item is a request for an easement authorization. I didn't ask Joe who was taking these, whether it was him or Travis. So I'll just
Mr.
start with,
Chair,
I'll default to Joe and let him pass the baton if necessary.
the big smile on Mr. Newberry's face indicates he's presenting.
All right. Sorry, I didn't know that, Travis.
Quite all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Planning and Parks Committee. The department is presenting to the committee for its consideration tonight a memo regarding a request for an easement authorization for Ameren, Missouri on city-owned property. The subject property that is owned by the city is now displayed on the share screen. It is a 2-acre parcel located at the southwest corner of the intersection of Pine Grove Parkway and State Route 109. As you can see from the aerial, there are existing improvements on the property, including stormwater retention basin, trail section, landscaping, and the western section of the bike and pedestrian bridge under State Route 109. A representative from Ameren, Missouri contacted the Department of Planning requesting the easement, which is depicted in this exhibit in the small orange box. The area of the easement is measured 10 foot by 30 feet, totaling 300 square foot in size. Again, the overall tract of land is 2 acres and is to address an encroachment of a guy wire that is existing and attached to a utility pole. At tonight's meeting, the department is seeking the committee's direction and input and direction regarding the requested easement area. And with that, Mr. Chair, we'll conclude the presentation. And if any of the committee members have any questions, the Department of Planning will be available to answer them.
Thank you, Travis. Does anybody have any questions? I see Deborah. Go ahead, please.
Is there going to be a cost with this easement? Is Ameren going to pay for us to allow them to use the easement?
Ameren, Missouri has already collectively expended funds to create the deed and exhibit that's part of the presentation tonight. Typically, the city does not request payment. In instances where public projects require relocation of utility lines, including electric, that's done at the cost of the utility, not the city. So although the Route 109 project required utilities to be relocated, there was no charge to the city. And the department would encourage the committee to consider granting the easement and not expect compensation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any other questions? Teresa?
If you're looking for a motion now, I would move that we grant the request for the utility easement on the city-owned property to Ameren UE.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to move forward with the department's request, seconded by Deborah. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. So the next on our agenda under planning matters is the review of the building and similar related codes. I don't see Travis smiling, so I guess this is Joe.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you may recall, as individual members of the City Council, there was a discussion relating to floor joist and the interpretation of the code regarding floor joist and the safety precautions that now are required. The conversation then led to a discussion amongst city council about investigating other potential interpretations or other items that may create concerns related to public safety in the construction code field. And so tonight, the department is presenting for your consideration the process it would like to employ to generate that information so that city council, first this committee, then city council, can understand the character of any interpretations and any potential changes to the building code the city of Wildwood might want to consider. On page 2 of the memorandum, the department would like authorization first to contact the 3 fire marshals of the respective fire districts that serve Wildwood and ask them for opinions relating to the building code and the other codes affecting trades. Secondly, the department would like to meet with St. Louis County code officials and get an understanding of the interpretations, the rationale behind them, and then bring that back to the committee. So thirdly, the department would like to put a survey on our website, just asking residents and others what they might think in terms of building code. Fourth, engage the Home Builders Association of Eastern Missouri. A gentleman named Barry Glantz, who's an architect, been an architect for many, many decades, has offered to assist if we would like to proceed forward in this regard. And then finally, allow the department to contact the American Planning Association and investigate through their planning service any information they might provide in this regard as well. The department believes these 5 steps will identify any potential considerations that are worth considering and certainly put at rest or at ease the city council and team members in terms of safe building in the city of Wildwood. Therefore, tonight, the department is respectfully requesting authorization to proceed forward with the 5 steps. If there are any questions or comments, Mr. Cross, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Newberry,
And
and I are
Jody,
available.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you need a motion for that authorization. Is that what you're seeking? Okay, so.
Yes, sir.
Dan, are you making that motion?
Yes, I am making that motion.
Okay, do we have a second on that? Seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Is there any discussion on that motion? Any questions for Joe? Rob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'll make this real quick. As you recall, I carried on a while at the council meeting about the building codes and so forth, and it wasn't the safety stuff and fire code stuff as much as it was the building envelope. There are new technologies that are better for heat rejection from the roof and from the attic and insulation, et cetera, that are disallowed by the current St. Louis County Building Code, which is what we follow. And I would suggest that there be a mechanism in your, a 6th step or something to account for that in your otherwise well laid out process. Maybe it's as simple as the public participation portion. And I'm very aware that every time we make a change to the building code, number one, the inspectors that we use, which are from the county, need to be educated. And number 2, they won't understand it. Number 3, they probably won't follow it. And so it's fraught with peril trying to do that. But I really think it's the right thing to do. So Joe, could you address that real quickly? You think that's reasonable?
Dr. Rambo, you're absolutely right. You did identify what I would call maybe appropriate green building techniques as a approach that is difficult to apply. And certainly I would not mind adding that as a step 6. Nothing may come of it, again, because of the rash reasons that you stated, but I think we ought to know about it and be aware of what's out there and why it's not being applied.
Right. There are some real simple things, and that probably can come from public participation. So thanks. That's all I had. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. Joe, go ahead, please. Joe Farmer.
Yeah, I think it's a great plan for us to at least have an idea of what's going on. I know in my normal job in real estate that, this is an issue that we struggle with mightily, whether it's working with new developments or building homes or remodels or whatever it may be. So I know that there is a push with just amongst the realtor population in general. And then also I know some of the home inspectors and things like that, to try to coalesce all of these into a much more user-friendly and uniform thing. Every city kind of has some different stuff. So I would probably caution us before we go too far down the road of enacting anything that, you know, there may be a larger mechanism that's coming down the pike from probably, I would assume, a state level. But, you know, it's a real weird problem that we got to get figured out here. So I think having that information and understanding at least what we would like to have, and then hopefully getting people to implement it. I mean, I'm redoing my basement right now. The inspection thing is weird. I mean, it's the weirdest thing ever. So anything that makes that better and more comprehensive, I am all for.
Thank you, Joe. Any other questions? So we have a motion on the floor to move forward, give the department authorization to look into this. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. That takes us into park matters. First on our agenda is the Parks and Trail maintenance. Joe, this is a lot of things. This is a lot of time just an FYI. Is this just an FYI again?
Yes, it is. There is no action being requested of the department. I just wanted to advise you that if you're getting calls from constituents about condition of the dog park, the trail corridors, or even our park properties, a lot of our contractors are struggling to keep employees, and the employees they have obviously are stretched very thin. So we're aware of it. We have a lot of work orders that are outstanding, and we're doing our very best to keep pace. If there are any questions.
Deborah?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for Steve and Joe. Would it make sense for us to have an employee on staff who could take care of these kind of issues? I know our parks are growing. Maintenance is increasing.
Well, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll go ahead and take the answer first, and then Mr. Vunich can certainly jump in. I want to reinforce Mr. Vunich's comments about the struggles we're having with our contractors. Both Mr. Vunich and Mr. Brown are doing everything they can, because believe me, they're getting kind of beat on by me, because I'm getting beat on by the mayor with regards to things not looking as nice as they could, from medians to cutting on the side of 100 and so forth. But as Mr. Vunich just pointed out, everybody, you know, and I dare say that you all are seeing that in your day-to-day lives in terms of dealing with different contractors, and it's a mess out there. So Gailey Contracting is one of our prime contractors that we use. They are really struggling. I actually pulled work away from them in terms of doing some weeding around the fountain and so forth, because they simply couldn't get it done. I was trying to do some things around City Hall, and I stopped Brenda from she's working in the extreme heat and so forth. We've brought in Go Green, and we've given them additional work to pick up where Gailey is not able to do it. So we're working with contractors. Adding someone on staff is that would not be an option. We don't have funds in the budget for that. And if I'm going to add staff, I'm going to add staff in other places, not somebody to go out and weed, medians and things like that. We could use an extra body or two in other areas, but I appreciate the suggestion. But I think our contractors, are getting caught up. Like I say, Go Green is stepping up. So, Mr. Vonage is just asking for patience on everyone's part, including mine. And I have to convey that message to the mayor and say we're doing the best we can. So that's really all that is meant with this email. Correct, Mr. Vunich? You're smiling a bit there.
Yes, we're doing our best. We'll continue to press as best we can, but like I say, it's just a unique time, and it's not one we've experienced in the past 26 years.
Right.
Right. Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is the overview of the AARP network. I do want to point out this was brought to my attention, which I brought it to Joe, by Councilmember Edens. So Joe, I will let you take it from here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as the chair just mentioned, this was an item that was identified back at our June meeting of this year. And it has to deal with a network of age-friendly states and communities program. And the department promised to do research relative to this particular program. And that research is provided as part of the memorandum. Primarily, the program is a way to promote a community to all age groups, not just seniors, about what they do to ensure that it is an age-friendly community from many different perspectives. Those perspectives being housing, neighborhoods, transportation, environment, health, engagement, and opportunity. And the department provided the information on each of those 7 general categories. Suffice to say, it requires an application, a letter of commitment, a proclamation or resolution, and then a determination by the oversight agency, the AARP. Locally, Alton, Illinois, Arnold, Missouri, and St. Louis County are participants. Other than that, there are no local communities in the vicinity that participate. Certainly from the review of the information, a lot of what they want to achieve, we are already doing. So if we were to participate and become a member of the network or program, it certainly wouldn't be a big leap for the city of Wildwood. Much of what they are attempting to do in their goals as described in the 7 general categories, I believe we are already doing or certainly could do very easily. So tonight, the department is requesting direction. Would you like us to proceed forward and apply for this particular program or not? And then certainly if you give us direction, Mr. Cross, Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cruz, and I will do our very best to implement. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And Joe, is there any cost to this?
I have thoroughly reviewed that and I could not find any literature, at least on the website and the different pages of the website that the department explored and produced for the memorandum.
Yeah, I couldn't either. So
I didn't see anything.
We have a request from the department. Deborah, are you making a motion that we authorize that request, or do you have a question?
I have a question first.
Sure, go ahead.
So other than the obvious, what benefit would this be to the city? Is there opportunities to apply for funding? What would Wildwood gain from participating?
Well, certainly there's a publicity component that the communities, the states are listed on the website and information is available about the communities and their programs. But your first point was the point I think is most compelling to participate, and that is there is a grant program and it's a very broad program and it is well funded. And so I think from the perspective of those participants, they are the ones that potentially receive the funding as a part of the network.
Thank you. Go ahead, Deborah. Oh, you're on mute, Deborah.
Yeah, I know. I move that we go ahead and take the department's suggestion and going ahead and applying to be accepted for the Aarp organization.
Okay, Rob, you are seconding it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So we have a motion on the floor with a second. Is there any discussion on it? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
I abstain.
We have one abstention. Was that, Tracy, was that you?
No, it was me, Teresa.
Oh, Teresa, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you, Teresa. So we have one abstention. That's Councilmember Clark. All right, great. I think that's going to be a great thing for the city. The next thing on our agenda is an update on in-person and virtual recreation programs. Sometimes this is FYI also, Joe. Sometimes you have this just FYI. Anything to add?
No, sir. If there are any questions, Gary would be glad to respond to them.
Okay, so no questions on that. Next item on our agenda is the update on the reservations and registrations and reservations. Sorry about that. Once again, quite often just an FYI from the department. He's nodding. So does anybody have any questions for the department on that? All right, wonderful. So the next thing we have on our agenda is a closed session matter. So I will give, I guess, Travis, or who needs a minute to make sure that we are not live or on YouTube live.
Gotta have a motion.
Oh, we do need a motion to go into closed session.
Yeah.
So do we have a motion from Councilmember Farmer to go into closed session? Do we have a second? We have a second from Councilmember Nyans. This is a roll call vote. Mr. Cruz?
Councilmember Clark,
All right, yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes,
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
and Chair Bartoni.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if you could give us a few seconds here to
Sure.
conclude the recording and go off live on YouTube.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would also respectfully request any attendee on the Zoom meeting now leave the meeting.
Yes, and we know her.
Thank you.
Oh, that was quick. So that is all we have. I'm just gonna open it up. Anybody got any last comments they want to make? Anything under miscellaneous? Deborah, go ahead, please.
yeah, just kind of go back to our first issue. Can we separate out the city standard for sound from the issue with the aerators?
Can we open this back up for debate?
Yeah, I'm not trying to debate it. I'm just asking, can we put that on the agenda next time? Is that even
Oh,
possible?
gotcha. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you, Deborah. Sure.
Thank you.
Anything else? Tracy?
I just want to throw this out there. We don't need to talk about this tonight or whatever. And Teresa and I had kind of talked about it briefly after our last council meeting, but I know everything is so backed up as far as maintenance and everything. You know, the last time when I was not able to attend when there was landscaping done at the park, would it be an option if some council members wanted to get together, maybe up around City Hall? Like I noticed the weeds are almost as bad as my neighbors next door, which is a whole nother topic. But and I understand, I haven't said anything about it because everybody's doing the best they can, but I would have no objection. Lord knows I can't grow anything, but I can pull out weeds. So I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there for another time. If we maybe came up with a work Saturday morning or something and we could all just go around town center and weed.
I would have to think staff would take volunteers for anything. Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Made by Councilmember Farmer. Seconded by Councilmember Flasher. It's non-debatable. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Bye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you, staff, again, and great conversation tonight, everyone. Great meeting. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone. See everybody
Aye.
on Monday.
Good job,
Good night.
everybody. Bye now.
Good night.